Long ago, in a kingdom nestled between great mountains and tranquil seas, there lived a king named Malik. His reign was marked not by conquest or grand displays of power, but by a deep sense of peace that permeated the land. The people of Malik's kingdom lived simple, harmonious lives, working together in the fields, tending to their families, and gathering in the evening to share stories beneath the stars. Their lives were not filled with the struggles or turmoil that many lands knew. Instead, each day was a gentle unfolding of nature's rhythm, the sound of birds in the morning, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the laughter of children in the village squares. King Malik in his youth had not sought the throne. He had inherited it from his father, who had been just as kind and wise. But unlike his father, Malik felt a certain peace in the simplicity of life. He loved to walk through the quiet paths of his gardens, to feel the earth beneath his feet, and to watch the sunlight play across the leaves of the trees. His palace, though grand, was not a place of luxury but of quiet refuge. The walls were lined with books and scrolls, not of military strategy or wealth, but of poetry and philosophy, the writings of sages who had walked the earth before him. Every day, as the sun rose and cast its golden light over the kingdom, Malik would sit at his desk by the window, observing the people in the fields below. They worked diligently but with joy, for there was no hurry, no urgency in their labor. They took the time to appreciate each task, whether it was plowing the soil, planting seeds, or caring for the animals. Malik often thought to himself that there was wisdom in this simplicity, something he had learned from the people themselves. In the evenings, as twilight descended, Malik would join his counselors in the great hall. He listened to their reports with patience, never quick to offer answers, always seeking to understand before responding. His advisors respected him deeply, for they knew he was not a king who sought praise or recognition, but one who sought balance, understanding, and harmony. Malik's decisions were often quiet ones, and they brought peace not only to his own heart, but to the hearts of those around him. Though Malik's life was filled with tranquility, a subtle unease began to stir within him as the years passed. He had ruled for many years, and in that time his kingdom had flourished. Yet there was something about the weight of the crown that began to feel heavier, a sense that it was not the throne that brought him peace, but the connection he felt with the people and the land itself. His heart, once light and unburdened, began to feel the quiet pressure of expectation, the expectation that a king must always strive for more, must always seek to expand, to conquer, and to build. One morning, after a quiet breakfast alone in the garden, Malik sat at the edge of the fountain, his mind still as the water before him. He thought of the many years he had spent in the palace, overseeing the kingdom's affairs. He had listened to the concerns of his people, made wise decisions, and nurtured the growth of his land. But in the stillness of the moment, something became clear to him. It was not his crown that gave him peace, nor the wealth of his kingdom, but the simple, gentle life that he had known before he wore the crown. He longed to return to that life, to walk among his people as one of them, free from the responsibilities and burdens that had come with his royal duties. And so, as the sun rose higher in the sky, Malik made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. He would give up his throne, not out of discontent, but out of a deep desire for peace. He understood, with a clarity that came from years of introspection, that true peace could not be found in the trappings of power or the weight of a crown. It could only be found within, in the quiet moments of reflection and connection with the world around him. Thus, Malik began the quiet process of preparing to relinquish his crown. He did not announce it with great fanfare or ceremony, for he knew that true peace was found in simplicity, not in spectacle. He entrusted the care of his kingdom to his most trusted advisors, knowing they would guide the people with the same wisdom and understanding he had sought to cultivate. And with that, he set out on a new journey, a journey not of power or riches but of inner peace, a peace that could only be found when one stepped away from the world of expectations and returned to the simplicity of life. As Malik walked away from the palace, his heart was light, the path before him was uncertain, but he felt no fear. For the first time in many years, he felt truly free, free to live without the weight of a crown, free to find peace in the quiet of the world that had always been there, waiting for him to return. And so, he walked on, the soft earth beneath his feet, the sky above him wide and endless, as he embraced a new beginning, one rooted in the stillness of the heart. King Malik's life was one of quiet observation. He did not chase power, nor did he seek the applause of his people. From the moment he ascended the throne, he had known only one guiding principle: peace. His father, the previous king, had been a wise ruler, known for his gentle hand and careful decisions. But it was Malik who would come to understand that true leadership was not about maintaining authority, but about nurturing the harmony that allowed life to flourish. Malik's childhood was simple, yet rich with the lessons of nature and human connection. He had been raised not in the high courts of foreign dignitaries, but on the edges of the kingdom, in a small village tucked away between hills. His parents had been humble, living off the land and tending to the community's needs. His father, the village elder, was a man of great wisdom and patience. His mother, though soft-spoken, had a presence that brought comfort to anyone who crossed her path. From them, Malik had learned the value of listening to the earth, to the people, and to the stillness that resides within. In the mornings, Malik would sit with his father under the shade of a great oak tree, listening to stories of ancient times. These stories were not of battles and glory, but of lessons passed down through generations. His father spoke of patience, of temperance, and of understanding. He would often say, "The world does not require haste. It is in the stillness that we find our way." Malik took these words to heart, and they became the foundation upon which his character was built. Despite his father's wisdom, Malik's path to kingship had not been an easy one. He had always preferred the simplicity of village life to the formalities of court. But when his father had passed, leaving him as the rightful heir, Malik had accepted the responsibility reluctantly, knowing it was not for himself, but for the greater good of the kingdom. The people had placed their trust in him, and though he felt unequipped for the role, he understood that leadership was a duty, not a choice. When Malik first arrived at the palace, he was struck by its size, its cold marble floors, and the sheer weight of the responsibility that pressed upon him. He had never felt comfortable in the grand halls, surrounded by courtiers who spoke in riddles of power and influence. His thoughts often drifted back to the quiet days spent in the village, working the land alongside the people he had grown up with. In those moments, he felt the weight of his crown as a burden, not a symbol of strength. Yet, in his heart, Malik knew that his kingship was not just about ruling. It was about ensuring the peace he had grown up with would continue. He was not interested in expanding borders or acquiring riches. He was interested only in preserving the tranquility of his land and protecting the quiet lives of his people. So he made it his life's work to listen to the land, to his people, and to the wisdom of those who had lived before him. He spent long hours in the fields, walking among the farmers and craftsmen, listening to their stories, understanding their struggles, and offering guidance when needed. His heart ached whenever he saw someone in pain, for he believed deeply in the interconnectedness of all beings. He often spent quiet evenings by the palace fountain, contemplating the balance between leadership and the natural world. In those moments, the weight of the throne felt lighter, as though the earth itself was whispering to him, offering its guidance. Malik's relationship with his people was not one of distance or formality. The courtiers and nobles were aware of his gentleness and his refusal to indulge in the power games that many of them relished. He was not interested in lavish feasts or ostentatious ceremonies. Instead, he valued the quiet moments of connection, the brief conversations with a farmer about the weather, or the time spent with a child who had brought him a wild flower from the field. To Malik, these were the moments that truly mattered. The closest companion Malik had was his childhood friend, a man named Rami, who had joined him at the palace as his most trusted advisor. Rami had been with Malik since the days of the village, and their bond had only deepened over the years. Rami was a man of action, a contrast to Malik's introspective nature, yet they complemented each other perfectly. Rami often served as a reminder of the outside world, its needs, its demands, and his practical wisdom was invaluable to Malik. Yet, despite their closeness, there was a growing unease in Malik's heart. He felt the kingdom shifting around him, not in ways he could immediately see, but in ways that left a deep, unsettling quiet. There were murmurs of unrest among the neighboring kingdoms, of people who sought more than peace, who sought power, control, and conquest. Malik feared that these shadows of ambition, once far away, were slowly creeping toward his own kingdom. It was a fear he kept to himself, as he had never been one to stir unrest with his own anxieties. As the days passed, Malik began to question the very nature of his role. Was his peace a fragile thing, easily disrupted? Could he protect this calm world he so cherished, or was he merely a guardian of something already slipping away? These thoughts, though quiet, echoed in the depths of his mind as he searched for the wisdom to guide him, and in the stillness of his palace, under the weight of a crown that did not suit him, Malik began to realize that peace was not something that could be preserved by force or by fear. It was something that must be nurtured, from within, and sometimes it required letting go. One afternoon, as the sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm amber glow over the kingdom, King Malik sat in his private garden. The wind rustled gently through the trees, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. It was a quiet day, much like any other. The palace was still, save for the faint sounds of the servants working in the distance. Malik sat on a stone bench beneath a large olive tree, his hands resting lightly in his lap as he gazed out over the fields beyond the palace walls. He had spent many such afternoons in this garden, reflecting on the rhythms of life in his kingdom, the steady pulse of the seasons, the ebb and flow of the village life, the calm, uninterrupted continuity that seemed to define his world. These moments of stillness were precious to him, for they brought clarity. In the silence he could hear his own thoughts, unburdened by the demands of the court or the weight of his duties. And on this particular afternoon, as he sat beneath the shade of the olive tree, he felt something stir within him, something that had been growing unnoticed for some time. He had always been content in his role as king, for the kingdom had prospered under his rule. The people were happy, the land was bountiful, and peace reigned. But recently something had changed. It was subtle at first, an unease that crept into his heart when he lay down to sleep or walked among his people, a sense of restlessness that he could not explain. Malik had always thought of himself as a man of peace, but lately that peace felt fragile, as if it might slip away at any moment. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the garden, Malik's thoughts turned inward. The kingdom was thriving, but he had begun to realize that the more he tried to maintain this peace, the more he felt burdened by it. The expectations of his people, the endless matters of state that required his attention, the delicate balance he had to maintain between tradition and change, all of it weighed heavily on him. It was then that Malik heard a soft rustling from the garden path. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman in her late years, with silver hair and eyes that shone with quiet wisdom. It was his mother, who had not visited him in the palace for many years. She had lived a simple life in the village where Malik had grown up, tending to the community and offering guidance to those who sought it. She had always been a quiet presence in his life, offering words of wisdom in moments of need, but never imposing. "Mother," Malik said, his voice calm but with a trace of surprise. He rose to greet her, his heart warm with affection. "What brings you here?" She smiled gently, her face lined with age but radiating a quiet serenity. She reached out and took his hand in hers. "I have been watching you, my son," she said, her voice soft and measured. "And I have sensed something in your heart that you may not yet understand." Malik lowered his gaze, uncertain. He had always respected his mother's intuition, but this was not a conversation he had anticipated. "What do you mean?" She sat beside him on the bench, her presence like a soothing balm to his weary soul. "You have carried the weight of this kingdom for many years, Malik. You have done so with honor and grace, but you have also carried it alone. There is a burden in the heart of a ruler, a burden that grows heavier with time, and you, my son, have become too heavy with it." Malik's heart tightened. He had never spoken of his growing unease, nor had he admitted to anyone the toll that his reign had taken on him. "I am the king," he said, almost defensively. "It is my duty to carry this burden." His mother's gaze softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yes, you are the king, but you are also a man. And a man must not live solely by duty, for duty alone can break a man's spirit." Malik looked away, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had always known that being a king came with sacrifice, but he had never considered that it could cost him something so precious as his peace of mind. "The people love me," Malik said quietly. "They are happy. The kingdom flourishes. We are happy, yes, his mother replied, but their happiness comes from your peace. And if that peace is lost, what happens then? Malik sat in silence, the weight of her words settling into his heart. He had always believed that his role was to protect his kingdom, to ensure its prosperity. But now, he saw the truth in his mother's eyes. He had been so focused on maintaining the kingdom's peace that he had forgotten the most important thing. Peace must first reside within the heart of the ruler, or it cannot spread to the people. His mother continued, her voice a steady thread in the growing quiet of the evening. You must ask yourself, Malik, whether the peace of the kingdom is worth the price of your own peace. Is it worth your soul? Her words echoed in his mind long after she had left the garden. That evening, as he lay in his bed beneath the starlit sky, Malik pondered the question his mother had posed. Could he continue to rule, knowing that the weight of the crown was slowly draining him of the very peace he sought to protect? He had always thought that peace was something to be preserved, something to be guarded. But now, for the first time, he wondered if peace could only be found when one was free from the burdens of authority. It was a quiet realization, one that unfolded slowly within him, but it was enough to shift his course. And so, Malik made a decision, one that would change the course of his life. He would seek true peace, not in the palace, not in the duties of kingship, but in the simple life he had once known. The very next day, Malik sent word to his counselors. He would step down from the throne. The days that followed the quiet revelation in the garden brought little change to the surface, but within King Malik a shift had begun. He remained the same calm and patient ruler his people had always known. He greeted them with the same warmth and kindness, offering advice when needed, attending to matters of the court with diligence, and continuing his usual walks through the gardens. Yet his heart had grown restless, and the stillness he so valued now seemed distant. In the days that followed, Malik sought solace in the quiet corners of his kingdom. He would spend long hours walking through the village, where life seemed to move in its unhurried way. The farmers tended to their crops, the artisans shaped their wares, and the children played without a care. The kingdom was indeed peaceful, and it seemed that the people had all they needed. They had no desire for more than this simple, harmonious existence. One afternoon, while strolling through the village square, Malik overheard a conversation between two women, their voices carried on the breeze. They were speaking of a neighboring kingdom, one ruled by a king who was ambitious and ever hungry for power. This ruler, it seemed, had begun to make threats against Malik's own kingdom, seeking to expand his borders and take what did not belong to him. Malik paused, hidden by the large stone archway at the edge of the square, as the women's words reached his ears. "Have you heard?" one woman asked. "King Darius has declared his intentions to take the land near the southern hills, our king's land." "He is bold," said the other woman. "But what can we do? King Malik's strength lies in his kindness, his peace. How will he respond to such a challenge?" The first woman sighed. "The king is a good man, but what if peace is no longer enough? What if he must fight?" Malik's heart skipped a beat. The thought of conflict, of war, was not one he had ever entertained. It seemed foreign to him, a disruption of the very fabric of life he had nurtured. Yet here it was, a challenge from outside the peaceful borders of his kingdom, threatening to unravel all that he had built. He walked away from the conversation, deep in thought. Could he truly defend his kingdom with kindness alone? Would peace be enough in the face of such a threat? The questions gnawed at him, and for the first time in years, Malik felt the weight of his crown more heavily than ever. Days passed, and the whispers of King Darius's ambitions grew louder. Malik called a meeting with his closest advisors to discuss the matter. In the council room, the air was thick with tension. The chief advisor, a wise old man named Rasim, spoke first. "Your Majesty," Rasim said, bowing his head, "King Darius's threats are not to be taken lightly. He is a man of ambition, and he will not hesitate to take what he believes is rightfully his." Malik's fingers rested lightly on the arm of his chair as he listened. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. "And what do you suggest we do, Rasim?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with the weight of the decision before him. Rasim moved at the other advisors before answering. "We must prepare for battle. We must raise an army to defend our borders and protect our people." A silence fell over the room. Malik's gaze drifted to the window, where the light of the setting sun bathed the kingdom in a soft golden glow. How could he bring himself to raise an army, to lead his people into conflict? The very thought felt like a betrayal of everything he had stood for. "I do not wish for war," Malik said, his voice soft yet firm. "But nor do I wish to see my people suffer. If it comes to that, I will do what I must." The council's discussion continued late into the evening, and by the end of the meeting, plans were drawn to fortify the kingdom's defenses. Malik, though hesitant, gave his approval. He would not abandon his people, even if it meant facing the one thing he had always feared: conflict. But as the days passed, Malik's unease grew. He spent more time walking the quiet paths of his garden, seeking wisdom in the stillness. One afternoon, as he sat by the fountain, his old teacher Amir came to visit. Amir had been a friend of Malik's father and had taught the young prince about the ways of the world. He had guided Malik in his early years, helping him to understand that true strength lies in peace and understanding. Amir sat beside him, his wrinkled hands resting on his cane and his eyes filled with the quiet wisdom of old age. "My king," Amir said softly, "you look troubled. What weighs so heavily on your heart?" Malik turned to face the old man, his eyes filled with a sadness that spoke of the burden he carried. "There is a kingdom to the south, led by a king who seeks to take what does not belong to him. I must defend my people, Amir, but in doing so, I fear I may lose the very peace I've worked so hard to protect." Amir studied him for a long moment, then spoke with great gentleness. "You are a wise and just ruler, Malik, but sometimes, to protect peace, one must also be willing to let go of it." Malik looked at him, confused. "Let go of peace?" "Yes," Amir said quietly. "Peace is not a thing that can be held forever, for it is always shifting, always changing. True peace is found not in holding tightly to what we have, but in accepting what comes, in embracing the ebb and flow of life." A silence passed between them, and Malik's mind turned over Amir's words. Could it be that peace was not something to be preserved at all costs? Could it be that the greatest peace lay not in avoiding conflict, but in accepting the inevitable flow of life's challenges and embracing them with wisdom? "I do not know if I am ready to let go of my crown, Amir," Malik said quietly. "But perhaps it is not the crown that I must relinquish. Perhaps it is the fear of what comes next." Amir nodded, his eyes wise and steady. "Only you can know that, my king. But remember this. Sometimes, true strength lies in the wisdom to step away when it is time, rather than to cling to what no longer serves." That evening, as the stars began to emerge in the sky, Malik sat alone on the balcony of his palace, overlooking the peaceful kingdom he had worked so hard to protect. The night air was cool, and the world seemed to hum with quiet life. And in that stillness, Malik knew what he had to do. His kingdom would not be saved through force or struggle. The strength of his rule had always come from his understanding of the balance between peace and change. To protect what was most precious to him, he would not fight. Instead, he would step away from the throne, not out of fear, but out of love, for his people and for the peace he had longed to preserve. In that moment, Malik knew that the greatest act of wisdom he could offer the kingdom was the willingness to let go, to step away from power, and in doing so, give his people the freedom to chart their own course. The time for decision had come. The following days were filled with quiet contemplation for King Malik. He had retreated into himself, seeking to understand what had been stirring in his heart. His interactions with his people continued as they always had, but his mind was elsewhere. The news of King Darius's ambitions lingered in his thoughts, but it was not just the threat of conflict that troubled him, it was the weight of his responsibility. How had he come to define peace? Was it merely the absence of war? Or was it something deeper, something that could not be measured by borders or military strength? One morning, as Malik wandered through the forest that lay to the north of his palace, he found himself at a familiar spot by the river. The water here was always calm, its gentle current reflecting the stillness of the sky above. Malik had often come here to think, to find clarity when his thoughts became too tangled. As he stood by the river's edge, he gazed into the water, watching the ripples dance across the surface. It was in this moment, surrounded by the tranquil beauty of nature, that something within him began to shift once again. He remembered the words his father had spoken to him many years ago, during their quiet evenings beneath the oak tree. "True peace, my son, does not come from the absence of conflict. It comes from the acceptance of what is, and the understanding of what must be." Malik had never fully understood these words at the time, but now, they echoed in his mind with a deeper resonance. His father had not meant that peace was passive or that one should allow harm to come without response. Rather, he had meant that true peace arose from within, a peace that remained unshaken, even in the face of challenges. Malik had spent so many years trying to protect peace through external means, through maintaining calm within his kingdom, and avoiding conflict at all costs. But now, standing by the river, he realized that the true challenge of leadership was not to avoid conflict, but to maintain inner peace in the midst of it. The river in front of him was a perfect example. It flowed not because it avoided obstacles, but because it adapted, finding its way around rocks, roots, and fallen branches. The river did not stop when it encountered an obstacle. It did not become angry or frustrated. It simply flowed, finding its path through every twist and turn. Malik recognized that this was the kind of peace his father had spoken of, the kind of peace that came from within, no matter what storms or challenges lay ahead. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the stillness of the river to fill him. It was in this moment, with the sound of the water flowing gently at his feet, that Malik came to a profound realization. The true purpose of his kingship was not to maintain peace by force or by avoiding difficult decisions. It was to guide his people through life's challenges with wisdom, patience, and understanding. If war came, Malik understood now that his role was not to fight with weapons, but to fight with the power of peace itself, to guide his people with a calm and steady hand, to find solutions that did not compromise the essence of what made them whole. The decision came gently, like the flow of the river. Malik would not fight King Darius with armies or bloodshed. Instead, he would seek peace through dialogue, through understanding. If Darius truly wished to take the land, Malik would offer him a choice: to join in unity or to leave the kingdom in peace. He would not use force, for force was the tool of those who did not understand the deeper strength of true peace. As the realization settled within him, Malik felt a quiet sense of clarity. The burden of leadership, which had once felt so heavy, now seemed lighter. The questions that had once seemed so complex now appeared simple, even beautiful. True peace did not mean avoiding conflict. It meant remaining calm in the face of it, and finding the way forward with a clear and peaceful heart. He turned from the river and made his way back to the palace, the weight of his thoughts lifted. He knew now what he must do. He would send word to King Darius, asking for a meeting where they would speak, not as enemies, but as men who sought the same thing: peace. The decision did not come with fanfare or celebration. It was not a dramatic turning point, nor did it involve any great spectacle. It was rather a moment of quiet understanding, a gentle shift within Malik's heart that would shape the course of the kingdom from that day forward. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, King Malik felt at peace once more, not because there were no challenges ahead, but because he had come to understand the true nature of peace. It was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of calm in the face of it. It was the river flowing, unhurried, no matter what lay in its path. It was a peace that lived within him, and one he would carry with him no matter where his journey would lead. As the days passed, Malik's restlessness deepened into clarity. His thoughts returned time and again to the same realization: peace could not be preserved by force. The peace that his kingdom enjoyed was fragile, yes, but it was fragile not because of the threat of war, but because it relied too much on the efforts of one man. The more Malik tried to protect that peace, holding it within his own grasp, the more he felt its weight. He had placed the burden of the kingdom's tranquility on his own shoulders, convinced that if he could only manage the balance of power, of alliances, of decisions, the peace would last. But now, standing at the edge of the river, Malik understood. Peace was not something that could be maintained by one ruler alone. True peace could only exist when it was shared, when every person in the kingdom felt that they were part of it, that they had a role in nurturing it. It was not something to be guarded or controlled, but something to be lived and breathed by all, in every action and every word. The weight that had been pressing on his heart for so long began to ease, and a quiet sense of resolution settled over him. Malik realized that he could no longer remain at the center of this balance. The peace that had flourished under his rule would continue to grow, but it needed to be freed from the confines of his own reign. He would step away from the throne, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. Only by releasing the hold on power could he allow true peace to spread beyond the walls of the palace and into the hearts of the people. He returned to the palace, his thoughts calm but resolute. The council was waiting for him in the great hall, as they always did, ready with reports, petitions, and concerns. Malik listened to their voices with his usual patience, but now he saw everything in a new light. The matters they raised were important, yes, but they were not the heart of the issue. The kingdom needed something more than the careful stewardship of its ruler. It needed the freedom to grow in peace, free from the fear of conflict, free from the idea that peace depended on the presence of one man. After the council meeting, Malik sent for his most trusted advisor, a wise old man named Jamil, who had served the royal family for many years. Jamil had always been a man of few words, but those words, when spoken, were heavy with wisdom. "My king," Jamil said as they sat together in the dim light of the royal chambers, "I sense that something has changed within you. You no longer carry the same weight." Malik nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the soft glow of the lantern beside them. "I have come to understand something, Jamil. Peace is not something I can hold on to. It is not something I can protect by force or by decree. It is something that must live in the hearts of all." Jamil's expression softened. "And you have decided to step away from the throne?" "I have," Malik said quietly. "It is not a decision made in haste or in fear. It is simply the recognition that peace can only exist freely when it is not bound to a single person. The kingdom will thrive not because I am its king, but because its people know how to nurture peace in their own lives." Jamil sat in silence for a moment, as though he too was weighing the significance of Malik's words. "You are a wise king, Malik, and perhaps this is the greatest wisdom you can offer your people, not to remain in power, but to show them that peace is a shared responsibility, not a gift bestowed by one ruler." Malik smiled, the weight of his decision settling into a quiet joy. "I will leave the throne, Jamil. But I will remain with the people. In a way, I have always been with them. I only needed to realize that my role is not to hold peace in my hands, but to encourage it in the hearts of all." The next morning, Malik made his announcement to the people of the kingdom. He called for a gathering in the village square, where the villagers often gathered to hear news, and where the pulse of the kingdom could be felt most deeply. As the people gathered, Malik stood before them, his voice steady but calm. "People of my kingdom," he began, "I have spent many years holding this throne, thinking that peace depended on my rule. But I have come to understand that peace is not a gift given by a king alone. It is something we all share. It is something we all create together, in every word, in every action, in every thought. And so, I have made the decision to step down from my throne." A murmur spread through the crowd, but Malik continued, his voice unwavering. "I do not step down in defeat or in fear. I step down because I believe that true peace comes when all of us are free to live in harmony with each other and with the world. I will no longer be the one to carry this burden. It is a responsibility we all must bear. Together." The people were silent for a moment, taking in his words, and then, as if in understanding, they began to clap, not in joy, but in recognition of the wisdom he had shared with them. It was a quiet applause, the kind that arises from the heart, not the mind, a deep, collective understanding that Malik had indeed taught them something far more valuable than any royal decree. As the days turned into weeks, Malik's decision was accepted with grace. The kingdom continued to thrive, not in the absence of a king, but in the presence of the people's shared peace. Malik spent his days among them, walking through the fields, sitting by the riverside, and sharing in their simple joys. His wisdom, his patience, his calm, these remained with them, not as a burden, but as a quiet, enduring strength. And so, King Malik found his peace not in the throne but in the hearts of the people, where it had always belonged. The following days unfolded with a quiet certainty. King Malik, having made his decision, began to prepare for the next chapter of his life with the same calm deliberation that had marked his rule. He called together his closest advisors and shared with them the wisdom he had come to understand, that the peace of the kingdom did not rest upon his shoulders alone, nor did the future of the land depend on the strength of one king's will. True peace was a collective endeavor, one that belonged to everyone who called the kingdom home. At first the courtiers were shocked, for they had never known a king who would willingly step aside. There were murmurs of concern, confusion, and even a few quiet protests. But Malik spoke with such clarity, with such quiet assurance, that they were soon at ease. He did not intend to leave the kingdom in turmoil. Instead, he proposed a new structure, one in which the people had a greater voice in the decisions that affected them. The council would be expanded to include representatives from every village and town, ensuring that each person, from the humblest farmer to the wealthiest merchant, had a role in the kingdom's future. He would remain as a guide, a quiet presence, but the affairs of the land would no longer be his sole responsibility. Malik's words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of contemplation, and as he spoke, the people of the kingdom began to understand. They had always known him to be wise and patient, but now they saw him as something more. He was a man who recognized the limits of his power and who trusted in their ability to carry on the legacy of peace he had nurtured. With a sense of purpose and unity, the people embraced his decision. As the news spread, there were no great celebrations, no dramatic farewell. The kingdom did not erupt into chaos or confusion. Instead, there was a quiet acceptance, a shared understanding that Malik's decision was not one of weakness, but of strength. People went about their daily lives as they always had, but there was a new sense of ownership in the peace they enjoyed. It was no longer something that came from the king alone. It was something they all had a hand in protecting. Malik's departure from the throne was not marked by a grand ceremony. He simply walked out of the palace one morning as he had done many times before, but this time with a sense of finality. He left behind the heavy robes of royalty and donned the simple clothing of a common traveler. He did not seek fame or recognition, he sought only peace, the peace he had found within himself. He returned to the village where he had grown up, the village that had always felt like home. The people there greeted him warmly, though there was no fanfare. They knew him, not as a king, but as a neighbor, a friend. He spent his days walking among the villagers, listening to their stories, helping when he could, and finding joy in the simple rhythm of life. The land, it seemed, had never forgotten him. The trees still whispered in the wind, the river still ran clear, and the sun still rose each morning over the fields. In the evenings, Malik would sit beneath the oak tree where his father had once spoken to him. He would listen to the sounds of the village settling for the night, the distant hum of conversation, the crackling of fires, the quiet murmur of the earth. There, in the stillness, Malik found the peace he had longed for. It was not a peace that could be taken or given, but a peace that came from the acceptance of the present moment, from being fully engaged in the life that unfolded before him. Years passed, and the kingdom continued to thrive. Malik's decision had not led to chaos, nor had it weakened the kingdom in any way. Rather, it had allowed the people to take ownership of their destiny, to build a society where peace was not a gift granted by a ruler, but a shared responsibility nurtured by each person who lived within it. King Darius's threats had never materialized into action. In the end, peace had been preserved not by force, but by the quiet, steady determination of those who lived by it. Malik, now an old man, sat one evening by the river, watching the water flow gently by. The same river that had once offered him clarity was still there, unchanged, carrying with it the lessons of time. The kingdom was peaceful, the people were content, and Malik had found the life he had long sought, one of simplicity, of stillness, and of connection. And so, in his final years, Malik lived not as a king, but as a man among the people he loved, content in the knowledge that the peace he had given up had not been lost, but had been passed on to those who would carry it forward. He had stepped away from the throne, but in doing so he had found the true meaning of kingship, not in ruling over others, but in trusting them to build a world of their own. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden light over the kingdom, Malik closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that peace had been found, not in the distance he had traveled, but in the quiet place he had always known. Months passed quietly in the kingdom after King Malik's decision to step away from the throne. The palace that had once felt so heavy with the burden of leadership now seemed to breathe more easily. The air was lighter, the people's voices fuller. Malik continued to walk among them, but no longer as a ruler. He was simply a man, a friend, a quiet guide. His presence was still a source of wisdom, but it was no longer sought to make decisions, to govern. Instead, people came to him for counsel on matters of the heart, for guidance in times of uncertainty, or simply to share a moment of peace. They would find him sitting beneath the great olive tree in his garden, or walking along the river, where the water moved with the same quiet flow that now seemed to mirror his life. The kingdom, too, had changed. The council Malik had established, with voices from all parts of the land, was thriving. No longer was there one person at the center of power. Decisions were made collectively, and the kingdom found itself more united than ever. It was a new harmony, one that had grown from the very soil of the land, nourished by the hearts and hands of all its people. One evening, as Malik sat by the river, the cool breeze of twilight stirring the leaves around him, he found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him to this moment. His father's words echoed softly in his mind. True peace does not come from the absence of conflict. It comes from the acceptance of what is, and the understanding of what must be. Malik had once thought that peace was something that could be controlled, something that could be upheld by a king's authority. But now he knew that peace was not a possession, it was a way of being, a shared experience. His heart was lighter now, no longer burdened by the weight of a kingdom that he had once thought was his to protect at all costs. The kingdom was thriving, and Malik understood now that the peace they enjoyed was not his doing alone, but the collective work of every person who had ever lived within its borders. He had simply been a steward of it, a caretaker for a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of soft gold and violet, Malik smiled to himself. He had lived a life of service, not to the throne or to the power it represented, but to the peace that had always existed, quietly beneath the surface. And now he had learned to let go, to trust that the peace would endure, even without his constant watch. In the distance, a group of children ran past him, their laughter ringing out like music in the quiet evening. He watched them with a quiet smile, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had no regrets. His life, once filled with the demands of rule and the pressure to maintain power, had been transformed into something simpler, more fulfilling. His journey had led him to a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly live in peace, to let go of the need to control and instead to simply be part of the flow of life. And so, as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Malik sat in peaceful silence. The world was still, and all was as it should be. The kingdom he had once ruled was no longer his to hold, but it was thriving. The peace that had always existed within it was now shared by all. And in that moment, Malik understood what he had been searching for all along. Not a kingdom, not a throne, but the quiet joy of simply being. Of knowing that peace is not something to be kept, but something to be shared and lived by all. The world, in its gentle rhythm, continued to turn as it always had, and Malik, having stepped aside from the weight of power, was finally at peace.